You think you know Das Boot, Wolfgang Petersen's claustrophobic masterpiece about German submariners fighting and dying in the Atlantic during World War II. For over 4 decades, this film has been celebrated as the greatest submarine movie ever made, a technical achievement that transformed how war could be depicted on screen. But the historical record reveals a production far more extreme and dangerous than audiences ever imagined. And once you understand what really happened inside that replica Unterseeboot during 220 days of filming, you will never watch this descent into madness the same way again. What Petersen created was not just a film about submarine warfare. It was an experiment in human endurance disguised as entertainment, one that would leave permanent scars on everyone trapped inside that steel tube. Number 20, The Submarine That Became a Prison. Production designer Rolf Zehet-Bauer built 2 full-scale Unterseeboot replicas at Bavaria Studios in Munich. One was complete exterior, the other was the interior where actors would spend the next 11 months. The interior replica measured exactly the same dimensions as an actual Type 7 U-boat, 50 meters long, 4 meters wide at its widest point, 2 meters at its narrowest. 51 men would work in that space for up to 18 hours a day. The set had no windows, no natural light, no fresh air circulation beyond what the minimal ventilation system provided. Petersen designed it this way deliberately. He wanted his actors to experience actual submarine conditions. What he created was a metal coffin. The temperature inside fluctuated wildly. During filming of the depth charge sequences, massive water tanks above the set would leak, creating humidity levels that approached 90%. Actors could not breathe properly. Mold grew on the walls within weeks. The smell became unbearable, a mixture of human sweat, diesel fuel effects, and rotting material. Production assistants who entered the set for brief periods would emerge gagging. The actors lived in it for months. Number 19, the director who demanded real suffering. Wolfgang Petersen's method was simple and brutal. If submariners in 1941 suffered, his actors would suffer identically. He banned deodorant on set. He wanted authentic body odor. He prohibited regular bathing. Actors could shower once every 4 days, matching historical submarine hygiene protocols. He controlled their diet, feeding them the same limited rations actual Untersuit crews consumed: canned meat, stale bread, weak coffee. By month 3, several actors had lost over 20 pounds. Jürgen Prochnow, playing the captain, went from 185 pounds to 158 pounds during production. His face transformed from healthy leading man to gaunt, exhausted survivor. That was not makeup. That was systematic starvation for authenticity. When actors complained about the conditions, Petersen's response was always the same: real submariners had it worse. Real submariners could not complain to a director and go home. You are actors. This is your job. Suffer authentically or leave. Nobody left. The German film industry was small. Walking away from Wolfgang Petersen would end careers, so they stayed and suffered. Number 18, the actors who could not escape. The set's layout meant actors in the aft sections were literally trapped during filming. To exit, they had to crawl through the entire 50-meter length while crew members and equipment blocked the narrow passageways. During one filming session in December 1980, actor Jan Feder suffered a panic attack in the engine room section. He was deep in the aft torpedo room when claustrophobia overwhelmed him. He started screaming to get out, but a camera crew blocked the forward passage. Lighting equipment filled the only exit route. It took 17 minutes to clear a path for him to escape. 17 minutes of genuine psychological breakdown while 40 people frantically moved equipment. Petersen kept the cameras rolling. The footage of Feder's actual panic attack was incorporated into a later depth charge scene. The terror on his face is not performance. It is real fear of being buried alive in a metal tube. Feder never fully recovered from that incident. He developed genuine claustrophobia that required years of therapy. Decades later, he admitted he still could not ride in elevators without experiencing anxiety attacks. Number 17, the historical consultant who knew too much. Petersen hired Heinrich Lehmann Willenbrock, the real Unterseeboot captain whose war patrol Buchheim had documented in his novel. Lehmann Willenbrock had commanded Unterseeboot 96 during the actual 1941 Atlantic patrol that inspired the story. He had survived the war, watched his crew die around him, and carried those memories for 35 years. When he visited the set in early 1980, he spent 4 hours examining every detail of the replica submarine. He checked valve placements. He tested the torpedo loading mechanism. He sat in the captain's chair. Then he turned to Petersen and said 3 words in German that the translator later revealed. "This is hell." Lehman Willenbrock meant it as a compliment. The recreation was so accurate it triggered his wartime trauma, but he also meant it as a warning. "You are putting these actors through what destroyed my crew." Petersen asked him to stay on as an advisor. Lehman Willenbrock refused. He told the production manager that watching actors simulate what he had actually survived was more disturbing than his actual combat experiences. He left the set and never returned. Years later, he admitted he had had nightmares about the film set for months afterward. Number 16. The depth charge sequence that caused real injuries. The famous depth charge attack scenes required explosive practical effects inside the cramped submarine set. Petersen's effects team-rigged charges throughout the interior that would detonate on cue, throwing actors around the compartment. The charges were real explosives, carefully calculated to be non-lethal but violent enough to look authentic. During the filming of the first major depth charge sequence in March 1980, 1 charge detonated prematurely. 3 actors were thrown against metal bulkheads. Klaus Wennemann, playing the chief engineer, hit his head against a pipe with enough force to open a gash requiring 12 stitches. Blood poured down his face while Petersen kept filming. The scene where the chief engineer appears dazed and bleeding after a depth charge impact uses footage from the actual accident. Wennemann received basic first aid, then was ordered back into position for additional takes. He filmed for 6 more hours before being released to get proper medical treatment. The production's insurance covered the medical costs, but there was no compensation for the concussion that caused him headaches for months afterward. Number 15. The water tank disaster nobody talks about. For scenes showing the undersea boat diving and surfacing, Petersen built a massive water tank capable of holding the exterior submarine replica. The tank measured 30 meters long and could be filled with 500,000 liters of water. For the sequences showing crew members on the conning tower during emergency dives, actors were positioned on the exterior replica as water flooded the tank. During one take in July 1980, the water pumps malfunctioned. Instead of controlled flooding over 45 seconds, 500,000 liters poured into the tank in under 20 seconds. 4 actors were on the conning tower when it happened. The wall of water hit them with enough force to sweep 2 actors completely off the submarine. Both went underwater. One surfaced immediately. The other, a supporting actor named Ralph Richter, did not surface for nearly 30 seconds. Divers retrieved him unconscious. He was resuscitated on the tank deck while Petersen demanded to know if the cameras had captured the shot. Richter survived, but suffered from recurring nightmares about drowning. The footage from that near-fatal accident appears in the final film. The genuine terror on the actors' faces as water engulfs them is not performance. It is survival instinct captured on camera. Number 14. The mold outbreak that hospitalized the crew. By month 5, the submarine set's ventilation problems had created a biological hazard. Black mold covered sections of the walls. The combination of humidity, human sweat, and poor air circulation created perfect conditions for toxic growth. Actors began experiencing respiratory problems, chronic coughing, difficulty breathing, skin rashes. The production medic initially dismissed these as minor complaints. Then in August 1980, 7 actors were hospitalized, simultaneously with severe respiratory infections. Laboratory analysis of the set environment revealed dangerous levels of Stachybotrys chartarum, a toxic black mold species. Health inspectors recommended shutting down production and completely decontaminating the set. Petersen refused. Instead, he had the visible mold cleaned and installed additional ventilation fans. The underlying contamination remained. Actors were required to sign liability waivers acknowledging the health risks before returning to work. Most signed because they had no choice. The alternative was being fired and replaced. 3 actors quit rather than return to the contaminated set. Petersen replaced them within 48 hours and never mentioned them again. Number 13. The psychological study Petersen conducted in secret. Before filming began, Petersen hired Dr. Hans Müller, a psychologist from the University of Munich, to design a study examining how prolonged confinement affects cognitive function and group dynamics. Every actor underwent psychological evaluation before production started. Then they were assessed weekly throughout filming using standardized tests measuring stress, depression, anxiety, and interpersonal conflict. The actors were told these evaluations were routine health screenings. They did not know Petersen was documenting their psychological deterioration. Dr. Mueller's confidential report, submitted to Petersen in January 1981, contained disturbing findings. After 4 months of confined filming, 68% of actors showed clinically significant depression symptoms. 43% exhibited stress levels equivalent to combat veterans. 27% demonstrated markers of post-traumatic stress disorder despite never having experienced actual combat. The confined environment, combined with Petersen's demanding direction and the authenticity of the violence simulation, had created genuine psychological trauma. Petersen read the report and classified it as confidential production material. He increased filming hours. If the actors were already psychologically damaged, he reasoned, their performances would only become more authentic. Dr. Mueller's study has never been published. It remains sealed in Bavaria Studios' archives, unavailable to researchers without Petersen's estate permission. Number 12. The scene that used real corpses. The sequence showing dead sailors floating in the Atlantic after their undersea boot is destroyed required bodies in the water. Petersen's effects team created mannequins for distant shots. But for close-ups, Petersen wanted something more realistic. Through a medical school connection, the production obtained access to cadavers donated for scientific research. 4 bodies were transported to the water tank facility and placed in period-appropriate German naval uniforms. Actors filming the rescue sequence were rowing through actual human corpses. They were not informed until after filming. When Jürgen Prochnow discovered that the floating body he had pulled closer to examine for the camera was a real cadaver, he confronted Petersen on the tank deck. Petersen's justification was identical to Kubrick's on Full Metal Jacket. Authenticity requires reality. Rubber does not look like death. The actors' genuine revulsion when they learned the truth created controversy that Petersen contained by threatening legal action against anyone who discussed it publicly. The footage appears in the final film. The German Medical Ethics Board later investigated but found no legal violations since the cadavers had been donated for educational purposes. Whether filmmaking constituted education was never definitively resolved. Number 11. The storm sequence that nearly killed the star. The North Atlantic storm scenes showing waves crashing over the conning tower were filmed in the water tank using massive wave generators. For the shot where the captain is nearly washed overboard, Jürgen Prochnow was harnessed to the conning tower while 40,000 liters of water was dumped on him from above. The force was supposed to simulate a large wave. During take 7, the harness buckle failed. Prochnow was swept off the conning tower into the churning tank. He went under, wearing heavy period costume and boots. The weight pulled him down. Safety divers were positioned 30 feet away. They reached him in approximately 20 seconds. By the time they pulled him to the surface, Prochnow had inhaled water and was choking. He was pulled from the tank, given oxygen, and checked by the medic. Petersen gave him 15 minutes to recover, then ordered him back into the water for additional takes. Prochnow refused. This was the first time the lead actor had directly defied the director. Production shut down for 2 hours while Petersen and Prochnow had a screaming argument in German that echoed across the sound stage. Finally, Prochnow returned to the water. The harness was reinforced. They completed the sequence. But Prochnow later admitted that moment of drowning while cameras rolled was the most terrifying he had ever been. The shot where he emerges gasping from the water shows genuine oxygen deprivation, not acting. Number 10. The director's cut that nobody could watch. Petersen's original assembly cut of Das Boot ran 5 hours and 32 minutes. It included every major scene, extended character development, and prolonged sequences showing the tedium of submarine patrol. The film moved at real-time pace for significant portions, replicating the actual experience of submarine warfare where nothing happens for days. Bavaria Studios executives watched the 5.5-hour cut and demanded massive reductions. Petersen initially refused to cut anything. Every frame was essential. Every scene contributed to the suffocating atmosphere. The executives insisted. No theatrical distributor would accept a film over 3.5 hours. Petersen spent 4 months in the editing room reducing the film to 2 hours and 29 minutes for theatrical release. The process was agonizing. He later described it as amputating his own limbs. But even the theatrical cut was too long for American distributors, who demanded further cuts to 2 hours for the United States market. Petersen refused. The film's United States release was delayed while negotiations continued. Eventually, a compromise was reached at 2 hours and 29 minutes, but Petersen never forgave the studios for forcing cuts. In 1997, he released a director's cut running 3 hours and 30 minutes. It remains punishingly long and deliberately exhausting, exactly as Petersen intended. Most audiences still find it too slow. That is the point. Real submarine warfare was slow. Authenticity requires endurance. Number 9. The ending that divided the nation. Das Boot ends with the undersea boot crew surviving impossible odds, returning home to La Rochelle, only to be killed during an Allied air raid moments after arriving. The final images show the characters we have spent 3 hours with dead on the dock, their bodies floating in the harbor where their submarine is destroyed. When the film premiered in West Germany in September 1981, this ending created a national controversy. Some audiences saw it as a powerful anti-war statement, the futility of survival, the randomness of death. Others saw it as dishonoring German servicemen who had genuinely suffered. The debate became politically charged. Left-wing critics praised the film for showing German soldiers as human beings rather than Nazi monsters. Right-wing critics condemned it for the same reason, arguing that humanizing Wehrmacht forces was inappropriate. Veterans organizations were split. Some praised the accurate depiction of submarine conditions. Others protested that the film generated sympathy for the wrong side of history. The controversy reached the Bundestag, where parliamentarians debated whether state film funding should have supported a project that portrayed German military forces sympathetically. Petersen received death threats from both extremes. Neo-Nazi groups accused him of making his German crew too weak and defeated. Anti-fascist groups accused him of rehabilitation Nazi-era military service. Petersen's response to all criticism was silence. He gave minimal interviews and refused to explain his intentions. The film would speak for itself or not speak at all. Number 8. The soundtrack that broke the composer. Klaus Doldinger was hired to compose the film's score. Petersen's instructions were specific. No traditional heroic war music, no romanticism. The score should sound like machinery, like the submarine itself. Doldinger spent 8 months creating a soundtrack built around mechanical rhythms, industrial sounds, and minimalist melodies. He recorded in an abandoned factory to capture authentic industrial acoustics. He used actual submarine equipment as percussion instruments. The result was unlike any war film score ever composed. It was deliberately uncomfortable, intentionally anti-melodic. When Doldinger presented the completed score to Petersen, the director praised it as perfect. Then he told Doldinger to start over. The score was too interesting. It distracted from the images. Petersen wanted something even more minimal, even more mechanical. Doldinger protested. He had spent 8 months on the original composition. Petersen was immovable. Redo it or be replaced. Doldinger spent another 4 months creating an even more stripped-down score. This version appears in the film, but the experience destroyed Doldinger's relationship with Petersen. They never worked together again. Years later, Doldinger released the original rejected score as a standalone album. Many critics considered it superior to the film version. Petersen never commented. Number 7. The premiere that became a riot. The film's premiere at the Berlin Film Festival in February 1982 turned into a political demonstration. Anti-fascist protesters gathered outside the theater, chanting that the film glorified Nazi military forces. Inside, the audience included actual Untersee Boot veterans, some wearing their old uniforms. When the film ended, the veterans gave a standing ovation. The protesters outside heard the applause and attempted to storm the theater. Police in riot gear blocked the entrance. Bottles were thrown. Tear gas was deployed. The gala reception was canceled for security reasons. Cast and crew were evacuated through back exits. Jürgen Prochnow's car was attacked by protesters who recognized him. His windshield was smashed before police intervened. The violence made international news, overshadowing the film's artistic achievements. Petersen released a statement condemning violence from all political extremes, but he also defended the film's humanity. arguing that showing German soldiers as human beings rather than cartoon villains was not the same as endorsing their cause. The statement satisfied nobody. The controversy followed the film throughout its international release. Every market had its own political interpretation. Every country has found different reasons to praise or condemn it. Number 6, the veteran who could not finish watching. At a special screening for Unterseeboot, veterans in Hamburg, a former submarine commander named Otto Kretschmer attended with 12 members of his surviving crew. Kretschmer had commanded Unterseeboot 99 during the war, sinking more Allied tonnage than almost any other Unterseeboot commander before being captured in 1941. He had spent the rest of the war in a British prisoner of war camp. He was now 70 years old and had agreed to attend the screening as a guest of honor. The film began. The veterans watched in silence. 30 minutes in, during the first depth charge attack sequence, Kretschmer stood and walked out. 2 of his former crew members followed him. They were found outside the theater, Kretschmer leaning against a wall, visibly shaking. He told the theater manager that Petersen had captured something worse than his actual memories. The claustrophobia was perfect. The terror was perfect. But watching it from safety as entertainment felt obscene. Kretschmer left without watching the rest of the film. He gave one interview about the experience, stating that Das Boot was the most accurate submarine film ever made and that he would never watch it again. Petersen later said that Kretschmer's walkout was the greatest compliment the film ever received. If a real Unterseeboot commander could not watch it, the authenticity was complete. Number 5, the American distribution battle. When Columbia Pictures acquired United States distribution rights, they faced a problem. American audiences in 1982 had limited interest in 3-hour German-language films about enemy submariners. Marketing research showed that presenting the film as a sympathetic portrayal of German military forces would alienate American viewers. The solution was controversial. Columbia's marketing campaign emphasized the anti-war message and downplayed the German identity of the characters. Posters focused on the submarine itself rather than the crew. Trailers were cut to minimize dialogue and emphasize action sequences. The campaign worked commercially but created new controversy. German critics accused Columbia of sanitizing the film's national identity. American critics accused the studio of smuggling Nazi sympathy into theaters under the guise of anti-war sentiment. Petersen was furious about American marketing, but contractually powerless to control it. The film performed moderately well in the United States, earning enough to be considered a success, but nothing like its German reception. The American campaign demonstrated that even a film trying to humanize German soldiers could only succeed by hiding that it was about German soldiers. Number 4, the suicide Petersen never discussed. In March 1983, 18 months after the film's premiere, a German naval officer named Karl Friedrich Merten was found dead in his apartment in Hamburg. Merten had served as an Unterseeboot commander during the war and had been a consultant on Das Boot, though uncredited. His suicide note mentioned the film specifically, stating that watching the recreation of submarine warfare had brought back memories he had successfully suppressed for 40 years. The note described nightmares about drowning men, burning oil, and the screams of his crew dying in a flooded compartment. Petersen was informed about Merton's death and the contents of his suicide note. He made no public statement. Production records show he sent a private letter to Merton's family expressing condolences, but the letter's contents have never been revealed. The incident was kept quiet by mutual agreement between Petersen and the family. The German media did not report it. Only decades later did film historians research the production discover documentation of Merton's suicide and its connection to the film. Petersen died in 2022 without ever publicly acknowledging that his pursuit of authenticity may have contributed to a veteran's suicide. Number 3, the edit that changed history. The theatrical version of Das Boot includes a scene where the crew celebrates sinking an Allied destroyer. They cheer, embrace, and sing patriotic songs. Some critics interpreted this as glorifying German military victory. Others saw it as showing how young men become complicit in violence. The scene was controversial from the first screenings, but here is what most viewers do not know. In Petersen's original 5.5-hour cut, that celebration scene continued for 3 more minutes. The extended version showed the captain's face changing from forced celebration to disgust. He walks to his cabin and vomits. The next scene showed him writing in his log about the men who probably just drowned on the ship they destroyed. The moral complexity was explicit, but for the theatrical release, Petersen cut the captain's reaction and the log entry. Without that context, the scene became ambiguous. It could be read as celebrating German victory or as showing the crew's desperate need for any positive emotion. The decision to cut the captain's moral reflection fundamentally changed the film's meaning. Petersen later restored that material in the director's cut. But for most audiences who only saw the theatrical version, the film's moral stance remained unclear. One editorial decision transformed anti-war meditation into potentially pro-military propaganda. Number 2, the replica that became a museum. After filming wrapped, Bavaria Studios faced a problem. The full-scale submarine replica had cost millions to build. It was too expensive to simply destroy, but who wanted a 50-meter Unterseeboot taking up valuable soundstage space? The solution was to donate it to the German Maritime Museum in Bremerhaven. The replica was disassembled, transported, and reconstructed as a permanent exhibit. Visitors can now walk through the same cramped spaces where actors suffered for nearly a year. But here is what the museum does not tell visitors. The submarine on display is contaminated. The toxic mold that sickened the cast was never fully removed. It was painted over, sealed behind new surfaces. In 1995, museum workers began experiencing respiratory problems. Environmental testing revealed the same Stachybotrys chartarum that had plagued the film production. The museum had to close the exhibit for 6 months while professional remediation teams decontaminated the interior. The cost exceeded 200,000 euros. When the exhibit reopened, visitors were warned that the WWII submarine should be toured quickly due to poor air circulation. The irony is perfect. Even as a museum piece, the replica Unterseeboot continues making people sick, exactly as it did during filming. The authenticity extends beyond performance into physical reality. Number 1, the truth Petersen never admitted. Wolfgang Petersen maintained throughout his life that Das Boot was an anti-war film that happened to focus on German sailors. He claimed his intention was showing the futility and horror of submarine warfare regardless of which nation's uniform the characters wore. This became the official interpretation accepted by critics and audiences, but Petersen's private papers, released after his death in 2022, reveal something different. In a letter to Buchheim dated August 1979, before filming began, Petersen wrote this: "The German military has been caricatured as evil for 40 years. That is accurate regarding the Nazi leadership and war crimes. But the young men in the submarines were not monsters. They were terrified boys who died horribly. Nobody has shown that truthfully. I want to make Germans capable of watching their own history without shame or pride. Just truth." This letter reveals Petersen's actual project. He was not making an anti-war film. He was attempting to rehabilitate ordinary German military service as separate from Nazi ideology. The distinction is crucial. An anti-war film condemns all warfare. A rehabilitation project argues that service in Germany's military during World War II could be honorable despite the Nazi regime. Whether this distinction matters is still debated, but Petersen never publicly admitted his true intention. Das Boot endures because it accomplished something unprecedented. It made a German World War II film that was neither celebration nor complete condemnation. It showed that you could depict German military service with humanity without endorsing the Nazi regime. Whether that is appropriate, whether it risks historical revisionism, whether showing individual Germans as sympathetic undermines understanding of collective guilt, these questions have no easy answers. Petersen navigated them by focusing on immediate human experience, the claustrophobia, the fear, the death. In that submarine, political ideology becomes irrelevant. Survival is everything. That focus allowed audiences to empathize with characters wearing enemy uniforms. It also created decades of controversy about whether such empathy is historically responsible. When you watch Das Boot, you're not just watching a submarine thriller. You are participating in an ongoing argument about how to remember World War II.